Good morning, everybody, and thanks for tuning into the Capitalist Cast this morning. Today, I am joined by Lowman Henry, the chairman and CEO of the Lincoln Institute. Lowman, could you explain a little bit about what the Lincoln Institute is?
Sure, Leo. The Lincoln Institute is a nonprofit public affairs organization. We're based in Harrisburg. We primarily produce radio programming, syndicated radio programming. We have Lincoln Radio Journal, which is our state issues radio program, and we air on over 90 stations here in Pennsylvania. And we have a nationally broadcast public affairs radio program, American Radio Journal, and it airs on about 250 stations all around the country. We also publish patownhall.com, and patownhall.com is an accumulator site where we publish the work of almost 30 conservative organizations and groups and columnists. And in addition to that, we also do some public opinion research, particularly our semi-annual Keystone Business Climate Survey. And we've been doing that now, Leo, for about 30 years. And that's a survey where we go directly to the owners or chief executive officers of businesses in Pennsylvania, and we get their opinion on state issues, some national issues, and on the state of the Pennsylvania economy. Therefore, we can find out what the people who are actually making the economy run think of what is happening. And that's been a really good barometer over the years for us of Pennsylvania's economic health.
Yeah, you guys do just fantastic work on the opinion research, and also I know that we appreciate the fact that the PA Town Hall runs all the different columnists, some of the stuff that we've published, and I know and I appreciate that the work that you publish as well. And that was actually one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on today, was to talk about. We put up a guest post from you that really talked about taking back Pennsylvania and about some proposed constitutional amendments. Can you talk a little bit about what those amendments are and where in the process we're at for that?
Sure. We actually have two different issue areas that we're working on with these constitutional amendments. We are all aware, painfully aware, of the impact of the draconian shutdown, business closure orders, restrictions that Governor Wolf has inflicted on the people of Pennsylvania, supposedly to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. His measures have had no measurable impact on slowing the spread of the virus, yet they have had the unfortunate result of causing a record number of business bankruptcies, throwing people into unemployment, giving the state record high unemployment rates. And our legislature, in various ways, attempted to rein in the governor's emergency powers. And the governor does, by the way, have the ability to declare an emergency. There is some question as to whether the emergency declaration powers apply to a pandemic. They are really meant for things like natural disasters. Say we get hit by a hurricane or a tornado or something of that sort. The governor has taken an expansive view of those powers, used them in the pandemic, and keeps renewing them every 6 months, which he has done now for over a year. The legislature attempted to rein those in. And the law, Leo, is very, very clear on this point. It gives the General Assembly the power to end the governor's emergency powers by a majority vote of the General Assembly. And then the law says the governor shall, which means must, end his emergency powers. The governor, however, claimed that he had to sign or veto the legislation, which of course he vetoed it. The matter went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which will lead into the second ballot question we're going to discuss. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, being an activist group of jurists who basically won back in 2015 after the organized labor movement in Pennsylvania poured millions of dollars into their races to grab control of the court, the activist Pennsylvania Supreme Court essentially rewrote the law and said the governor could go ahead and he could veto the legislature's move to end his emergency powers. So that's exactly what occurred. The Supreme Court rewrote the law. The governor vetoed the bill. Emergency powers still in effect. Pennsylvanians still paying the economic and psychological and social costs of that. So that really only left the legislature with one course of action, which is to amend the Pennsylvania Constitution in a way that it clearly defines, of course, with our Supreme Court, who knows, but clearly defines the legislature's ability to call an end to these emergency powers. So there are actually two companion proposed constitutional amendments that would do just that. Now, the process for amending the Constitution, as you might imagine, is very difficult. It requires that the proposed amendments pass 2 consecutive sessions of the General Assembly, and they must pass in an identical manner, exact wording in both. So what happened the previous session of the General Assembly, which ended November 30th of last year, the legislature, both the Senate and the House, passed these 2 proposed constitutional amendments. We started a new session of the General Assembly here the first week of January. So now we need the legislature to pass the exact same wording of those 2 constitutional amendments, which they are in the process of doing. It's cleared committee. Our hope is that that vote to finally pass it will occur within the next couple of weeks. If it does, the final step is the proposed constitutional amendments will go on the May ballot, and there voters will either vote yes to approve the amendments or no to disprove them. In other words, in May, we, the people of Pennsylvania, finally will have an opportunity to go to the ballot box and reclaim control of our state. So that's where we are with those amendments.
So as we look at the amendments themselves, there's, as you mentioned, there are 2 of them, and
Yes.
it's important that both of those amendments pass. They've already, as you noted, passed committee, and then it's really a matter of the votes being brought up on the floor and having going through the process of the floor vote, in a timely manner so that we can get them on the ballot. Who, when we look at the legislative process, who's actually in control of when things come up for a vote on the floor?
Well, of course, both the state Senate and the state House are under the control of Republicans. Now, as we have learned, that doesn't necessarily mean they act like Republicans and conservatives and vote the way that we intended them to vote when we elected them to office. But in the House of Representatives, as well as the Senate, floor action is controlled by the majority leader. So in the House, the majority leader is Representative Carrie Benninghoff of Center County. In the Senate, State Senator Kim Ward of Westmoreland County would be the majority leader. So they are the 2 key players. Now, Senator Ward, I believe, is a sponsor, if not a co-sponsor, of this legislation. So I really don't have any doubt that the Senate's going to act. And frankly, I think that the House will move quickly as well. Now, on the other ballot question that we're going to discuss and haven't discussed yet, may be a little bit more difficult to get that done by May because there is some internal division in the Republican Party over it. But on this effort to end the governor's emergency powers, there is widespread, almost unanimous agreement in the Republican caucus in both houses to do that. Republicans have control of both houses by significant majorities. So we should see these 2 ballot questions, these 2 proposed constitutional amendments on the ballot in May. But then keep in mind, Leo, that Governor Wolf is already attacking them. Amazingly, the governor said, this move to amend the Constitution is undemocratic. Well, what could be more democratic than people going to the polls and voting directly on an issue? So this is what we're going to hear from Governor Wolf and his allies over the next few months.
Yeah, and it's really amazing because what the amendments do in regards to the emergency powers is really make sure that the members of the General Assembly have an equal say in what happens in emergencies lasting longer than 21 days. And that is the opposite of anti-democratic, because you are empowering the people's representatives to really take an active role in making sure that the emergency declarations not only aren't abused, but in situations where we have an emergency that is lasting longer than 21 days, that the legislature is taking steps if there are necessary steps legislatively.
Well, this is entirely consistent with the way Governor Wolf has handled this whole thing, Leo. He has conducted himself in the most arrogant, self-centered manner I've ever seen a governor of Pennsylvania act over this particular issue. He has refused to engage in discussions with the General Assembly. The General Assembly has passed repeated bills designed to reopen Pennsylvania. The governor vetoed all of them. He thinks he's really operating as a king, as a despot here, refusing to engage with the legislative branch, let alone refusing to engage with any of the stakeholders in the process. When we had the business closure orders last year in March and April, he did them at the last moment. He's done all of this at the last moment without consulting anybody. Only he and former Health Secretary Dr. Rachel Levine, they think they know it all. They think they can just act unilaterally, and that's what they've done. And the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has allowed them to get away with it.
Yeah, and it's really quite frightening, because if the governor has the authority to just declare an emergency, and the Supreme Court has basically said, well, in order to get around this emergency, you essentially need to have more votes than you would to impeach the governor.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. What steps, or I mean, what would be the results if a Republican governor came in and declared an emergency on something and started issuing dictates on regulations? We have an economic emergency, so we are going to get rid of a lot of these regulations that we currently have.
Well, and this is the thing, Leo. What we've seen here is a historic breakdown in the checks and balances of our entire governmental system in Pennsylvania. The law that was passed by the General Assembly that set up these emergency powers, and the legislature granted those powers to the governor, also provided for the legislature to be able to end them. And it's extraordinary that the legislature did just that. I don't think it's ever before happened in the history of the state that the legislature voted to end a governor's emergency powers. And then he ran roughshod over them, and his union purchased state Supreme Court rewrote the law and thereby eliminated the checks and balances that were not only in the Constitution, but were also ensconced legislatively. So really, the only way that we can restore balance and checks and balances to our system is to have these two amendments on the ballot in May and approve them. At that point, then the legislature can move to bring an end to the governor's reign of terror that we've had.
So this is a good opportunity in mentioning the Supreme Court and their role in this, and also their role in other decisions, essentially redrawing, new congressional districts in the weeks ahead of a primary election. We've seen a lot of really bad decisions coming out of the Supreme Court for a variety of reasons. And the second proposed constitutional amendment deals directly with the judiciary, not just the Supreme Court, but all of the appellate branches. Can you talk a little bit about what changes that would make?
Well, first of all, we need to understand how totally unjudicial this current Supreme Court has been. Since the labor unions purchased control by electing 3 Supreme Court justices in 2015, they have violated the state and federal constitutions by judicial fiat redrawing the congressional district lines in Pennsylvania, which is clearly a power delineated for the state legislature. They got away with that. They have rewritten essentially the law, as we've been talking about, on the governor's emergency powers. And then last year, they issued a series of rulings that basically rewrote election law, and in my view, is responsible for destroying the ability of Pennsylvanians to have confidence in the election that was held in 2020. So we have this string of activist decisions issued by this court rewriting law, which is not what judges are supposed to do.
Right.
So in order to get around this, right now, The Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the Superior, and the Commonwealth Courts, the three appellate courts in Pennsylvania, are all selected by direct election in odd-numbered years, such as we're in right now. We will have on the ballot seats on those three courts, and we get to vote directly on that. The problem is, the way it has played out, lawyers from the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh areas tend to win those elections. As a result, they tend to be overwhelmingly activist, left-wing jurists. So to bring some balance, Representative Russ Diamond and a number of others have proposed a constitutional amendment that would have us elect those jurists by district. In other words, the 7 justices of the Supreme Court, instead of having them be elected statewide, we would divide the state into 7 Supreme Court judicial districts that would be even in population, exactly how we do it for Congress or the state legislature.
Right.
And then we would elect these justices and judges by region. So what this would do is it would ensure, first of all, that all of Pennsylvania is represented on the judiciary. And, we need to disregard this notion, Leo, that somehow the judicial branch is above the other 2 branches, that they're sacrosanct, that they're removed from politics. Well, whether you're talking about the Cash for Kids scandal or all of the transgressions of the Supreme Court I just mentioned, they're clearly not above politics. And we're supposed to have 3 co-equal branches of government. So the judiciary needs to get knocked off its high horse, put on the same level with the other 2 branches of government. And if we elect these judges and justices by region, it then gives us an opportunity to restore some integrity to the system by electing judges and justices who are going to be jurists and not view themselves as super legislators.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we take a look at there's the argument that the judiciary. I mean, you mentioned one of the kind of red herrings, that judiciary. This is going to politicize the judiciary, which is just absurd. It's already politicized. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth spending millions of dollars, per election on electing who's there. But the other thing that's interesting to kind of think about is that as far as a district system, and it's different within the context, but at the federal level, we have judicial districts all over the country. And filling those seats is obviously it's different. It's not a direct election, but it isn't particularly odd to have judicial districts. It's was the hallmark of the federal judiciary when the federal government when we were initially founded. They were they called them circuit courts because the judges would actually go around their particular districts on horseback to hear cases. I mean, we're very far from that, but it's important to kind of recognize that there is historic precedent for setting up larger geographic areas, and we have district magistrates. We have a whole variety of examples of there being some sort of geographic component to a judiciary. So I mean, really, it makes sense when we take a look at it to have something similar in place at the state level. It's certainly, I don't think it'll solve all of our problems, but making sure that we have not just diversity in terms of gender and race and religion, but also some geographic diversity in it, just because there's differences in how people view things, depending on where they view the law, depending on where they're at in the state and what their relationship with the law is.
Well, and the other thing, Leo, with these judges and justices running statewide, we look at U.S. Senate and governor races and the fact that $30-40 million in the case of U.S. Senate races, $80-90 million spent for those candidates to become known by voters statewide. So we have these judicial races, which only generally raise a couple $100,000, although when an outside special interest group like organized labor and the trial bar come in and spend a couple $1 million, they're able to actually purchase seats on these courts. And that's because statewide, it's very difficult for these judicial candidates to become known. If you do it by district, now these candidates will be able to spend their limited resources in a smaller geographic area. It allows for more grassroots campaigning and for people to actually get to know who the candidates are. For example, this year we're going to be electing a Supreme Court justice, 2 judges of the state Commonwealth Court, and 1 judge of the Superior Court. So those 4 individuals have a Herculean task on a small amount of money to get known by voters all over Pennsylvania. If we were doing this by district, it would be much easier and less expensive for them to get known. And as a result, I think we'd have a better judiciary.
Yeah, and speaking of the judicial elections, you had mentioned that there are going to be 4 on the ballot. The Supreme Court is, because of retirement of, is he Chief Justice?
Yes, Chief Justice Saylor.
And then the 2 Commonwealth Court judges, could you just, the difference between the Commonwealth and the Superior Court?
Essentially, the Commonwealth Court handles civil matters and regulatory issues. And to make it very simple, Superior Court handles criminal appeals.
So we have the 2 seats on the Commonwealth Court. 1 of those is a retirement, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Well, I guess technically they're both retirements. One was the one seat was filled for a partial term by an appointment by Governor Wolf. So that the end of that is coming up this year, and then the Superior Court is also a retirement, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes. Now, on the Commonwealth Court, this actually, I think, is a prime argument against what most members of the legal community push, something that they call merit selection. Merit selection, of course, it's one of those nice-sounding left-wing terms that makes you think something good's going to happen. Merit selection has nothing whatsoever to do with actual merit. What merit selection means is that insiders, rather than have us voters vote at all on these judges and justices, you would have insiders pick who they are and appoint them. Well, we saw just how well that worked out with this seat on the Commonwealth Court. There was this opening. So what happened? The person appointed, there was a deal between the former president pro tem of the state Senate and Governor Wolf to appoint an insider staff person by the name of Drew Compton in the Senate to a seat on the Commonwealth Court. Now, Drew Compton has never even judged a pie eating contest, let alone be qualified to be judge. But in a backroom swampy deal, he was appointed to the Commonwealth Court. Of course, now he has to run for a full term. The Republican State Committee is in the process as we speak of going through their endorsement process. We will see whether he is endorsed or whether he can win election. But it's those type of backroom deals that you would always get if you went to merit selection, which is why merit selection is an even worse system than statewide election. Clearly, this constitutional amendment that would give us the ability to elect these judges and justices by region is the most democratic and gives we the voters the most say on these courts.
Yeah, and it's speaking of Judge Drew Compton. One of the other things that's interesting is he was involved in a case on one of Governor Wolf's shutdown orders.
Yes.
And essentially he punted that decision and, did not accept the challenge to the governor's shutdown orders, the one that came just before Christmas for restaurants.
Well, if the guy who appointed you wants you to rule a certain way, you're going to view very favorably the opinion of the guy who appointed you. And see, this is where, Leo, as I said earlier, the courts are not neutral arbitrators. They're not above everybody else in pristine. They are very much activists in politics and policy, just like the other 2 branches. That's why it's important that we go out and find candidates for these positions who are going to bring us back to actually ruling in accordance with the Constitution. That is not what Judge Compton did, and it's not what the Supreme Court has been doing. They've essentially been rewriting the law or allowing the governor to get away with things that are clearly unconstitutional.
Yeah, and really we've seen that time and again. And I think that the proposed amendment, offered by Representative Diamond and others is definitely a way to bring some accountability back to the judiciary. So that particular amendment, it was passed again. This is in the process. It was passed in the last legislative cycle that ended, so it needs to be passed again, and then it'll get onto the ballot.
Yes.
What do we see as being kind of the hurdles to that happening?
Well, as you mentioned, it's already passed once. So if it's passed a second time, then we, the people, actually get to vote on it, which is what should occur. Of course, now it's going through the process of being approved a second time by the General Assembly. And this is where the legal judicial profession is going to dig in to try and protect their little fiefdom, and the special interests who benefit from it are going to really dig in. They are going to try to prevent, especially the House, from passing this a second time, because they don't want it to get to us. They want to keep control of the process among their tight-knit small group of insiders and special interests, and not allow we, the people, to vote on it. So it's important that folks who are listening to this interview get a hold of their senators and their representatives and say, hey, look, this needs to pass a second session, and let we, the people, decide whether this is what we want. There's going to be a higher hurdle to cross for that than the ending the emergency power amendments, but it's something that very much needs to happen. This may not happen in time to be on the May primary ballot. This might be something we deal with maybe in the November election. Yeah,
and it's it's worth noting that again, the majority leader in the House and the majority leader in the Senate will be the ones who bring up these, decide when these items come to vote, on the floor of their respective chambers. So if anybody who is watching, if you are, in a district, particularly if you are in, Kerry Benninghoff's district, Representative Benninghoff's district in central Pennsylvania, it's really important that you contact him and let him know, how important you think it is for both of these measures to be on the ballot in May, so you can have an opportunity to vote on it.
And the challenge here, Leo, is what we generally face with trying to pass pro-growth legislation or get us back to constitutional government. The Democrats will vote in absolute lockstep against all this. There is, within the Democrat Party, within the Democrat caucuses in the legislature, there is no room for diversity of opinion. They have to cast their votes 100% in line, or they're an outcast. So we're not going to get any Democrat votes in the legislature for this. Now, as I mentioned, both the House and Senate are under Republican control. The thing is, Republicans don't necessarily always do the right thing. And there are a lot of legislators who are also lawyers, attorneys, and who have to practice in front of judges. And they're the ones that are now torn. Do we cast a vote in line with the special interests of our profession, or do we represent the will of the people? These are the folks we have to get to and say, look, forget your profession, forget what the legal community wants. We, the people, are who you represent. You need to vote in our interest.
Yeah, and make sure that you are not, in the Arlen Specter wing of the Republican Party at this point.
Which unfortunately still exists, and regrettably, with a lot of legislation, including budgets, etc., the Democrats are generally successful in peeling off a number of Republican votes to whatever their position is. But as I mentioned, we never get the Democrats to do that the other way.
Yeah. Well, I do, again, want to thank you for taking some time this morning to come on and talk to us. If people would like to learn more about Lincoln Institute, what's your website? Where can they find out more about what you're doing?
Our main website is lincolninstitute.org. And as I mentioned at the start of the interview, we publish Pennsylvania Town Hall. So that is patownhall.com. And if you go to patownhall.com, you can learn all about us and a whole lot of other folks.
Thanks again, Lowman, for taking some time to talk about these, very important amendments that are under consideration. And again, folks, if you enjoy this type of information and appreciate these types of broadcasts, please continue to tune in on Monday mornings at 10 o'clock. And also be sure to learn more about CAP by visiting www.empowerpa.org. And also feel free while you're there, if you would care to make a donation to us so we can continue to make these types of broadcasts, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, Lowman, thanks for coming on today and taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you, Leo. Appreciate it.